What did Absalom do to the field of Joab, and why? This is the question, and we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Samuel on walking through the Bible.
His word, the glory of his cross.
Today we're going to be discussing 2 Samuel chapter 14, verses 25 to 33. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 25. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Samuel chapter 14, beginning of verse 25. Now in all Israel there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, at the end of every year he cut it, because it was heavy on him. When he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels, according to the king's standard. To Absalom were born 3 sons, and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of beautiful appearance. And Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face. Therefore Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent again the 2nd time, he would not come. So he said to his servants, See, Joab's field is near mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and came to Absalom's house and said to him, Why have your servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered Joab, Look, I sent to you, saying, Come here, so that I may send you to the king to say, Why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. Now therefore let me see the king's face. But if there is iniquity in me, let him execute me. So Joab went to the king and told him. And when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed Absalom. Absalom had been banished from Israel for killing his brother Amnon. Now, even though Amnon deserved to die, Absalom shouldn't have been the one meting out the punishment. It should have been David. The place that Absalom lived in exile was Geshur, an area not too far from the Sea of Galilee. He lived there with his maternal grandfather, the king of Geshur, for 3 years. In Jerusalem, David had mixed emotions about his son in that he knew that Amnon deserved to die for what he did to Tamar, but he also knew that Absalom sinned in killing his brother. Joab devised a plan to seek Absalom's pardon by using a wise woman from Tekoa, a city south of Jerusalem. This woman tricked David into thinking that he was pardoning her son who accidentally killed his brother, when in fact she was using that story to show David's inconsistency, leading to David pardoning Absalom. Now again, we must note that the law of Moses didn't grant David this power. But there are many things about the law of Moses that the children of Israel took liberty with. And so since the neighboring kings possessed pardon power, David took this power for himself. Where was God in all this? Silent. That does not equal his approval, but if man wasn't going to execute the justice that the law required, they would suffer the consequences for those actions, as we will see for David, the Lord willing, in chapter 15. Now, just because Absalom was pardoned for his sin did not mean that he was accepted back into the royal court, for David did not do that because what Absalom had done. In other words, there would be consequences for Absalom's actions, just not death. And at first, Absalom seemed to accept this punishment, but that would change here in today's reading. Coming to verse 25, we now get a description of Absalom that will lead into all that is about to come afterwards. We find that Absalom was known for his good looks and was often praised for them. It is even said that from head to foot not a blemish could be found on him, which likely was an exaggeration, as this is what he was praised for, not what was actually the case. Having all this praise heaped upon him, it is easy to see how Absalom became conceited and vain. Because of his beauty, it seems that Absalom did that which was unusual for a man to do, which was to grow his hair long. We know that this was unusual for as part of the Nazirite vow, men were to let their hair grow long, and when the vow was completed, they needed to shave their head. How long did Absalom grow his hair? Well, he only cut it once a year, it seemed, and so whatever length one could get in that time span. Now it says that when he cut his hair, that would mean the excess hair, it would weigh about 200 shekels according to the king's standard. There is much debate about how much a shekel according to the king's standard was, as that could differ from the weight of the shekel of the sanctuary, but estimates are between 3 to 6 pounds. Now, that would certainly be quite heavy, as the text describes, but at the lower end, not out of the realm of possibility, especially if ointments were used in the hair in order to beautify it. However, there could also be a copyist error here with numerals, as is sometimes the case, as the Hebrews wrote out their numbers rather than using numerals like we do, and the number be lighter than this, though still a heavy amount of hair. Whatever the case, let's remember that Absalom tended to keep his hair a little longer than most men, as that is something that is unusual in his life. We find that Absalom had a wife and 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. The 3 sons are unnamed, likely because they died young, due to a conclusion we can draw from 2 Samuel 18, verse 18, about Absalom saying he had no sons. His daughter was named Tamar, likely out of love and respect for his sister. This woman is described as a woman of beautiful appearance, much like her aunt would have been. Time now shifts in verse 28 to 2 years later. It is now 5 years after the death of Amnon and 7 years after the rape of Tamar by Amnon. David would be around 57 to 58 here, meaning that we're into the final dozen years or so of David's reign, or around 982 BC. Absalom, as we said, was pardoned for his sin, but he was viewed not really as that in the eyes of David, for in the 2 years since his return, he had not seen his father's eyes, and this infuriated Absalom. His brother Amnon raped his sister, and David seemingly only gave him a talking to, yet Absalom, in his mind, had meted out justice for his sister, something that David should have done, and had been effectively banished from the king's court these past 5 years, with no end in sight. So in order to rectify the situation, Absalom called for Joab, the man who brought him back from exile, probably because he viewed Joab as an ally and friend due to this. However, Joab didn't come. Why? Because Joab likely wasn't acting in Absalom's case out of concern for Absalom, but rather David and the politics surrounding the matter. And so when Absalom had had enough of the silent treatment from Joab, he thought he would get his attention by having his servants set Joab's barley field on fire. And this worked, for Joab came to complain to Absalom for doing so. Absalom explained that it was in fact he who was being mistreated, for he had been brought back from Geshur supposedly pardoned, and yet still lived in exile to his father among his own people. If such was going to be the case, why didn't he remain in Geshur, where he could live among the king's family there? He demanded an audience with David, and Joab delivered. We don't know what Joab said, but David agreed to see Absalom. And when called, Absalom showed the respect due his father as king. Now I'm sure that David and Absalom spoke. The contents of such a conversation is not recorded for us, but afterwards David kissed Absalom, a true sign of forgiveness in that culture. With Absalom now fully pardoned, all should have been well in David's kingdom, right? Well, as we know, God's punishment for David's sin with Bathsheba, those 12 to 14 years earlier, was not yet complete. And so, for David, the pardoning of Absalom was going to have major consequences for him. For David, it would have been better for Absalom to have remained in Geshur. However, he did not, and we'll start to see what will happen to David, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 1 to 12, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.